Salutations, everybody. It is Matty here today, and we're gathering once again to talk about Ubisoft, which I know really isn't in my wheelhouse of companies I focus a lot on here on the channel. I know I talk about pretty much everything gaming here, but when it comes to Ubisoft, I typically just review their games and move on. You can just see a whole catalog of them on my channel, most of them not being high praise outside of games like Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown or Mario & Rabbids. These random experimental titles here or there from Ubisoft typically get my approval more than their AAA releases, and that's why we're at where we're at now, where we're looking at the plummeting share value for Ubisoft. And as you can see here, this is staggeringly low. It has decreased a tremendous amount over the years. It really has been a death of a thousand cuts. But there's shares on the market, and then there is mind share. And by mind share, I mean using your brain. And by that, I mean let's talk about Brilliant, today's sponsor. The following video is sponsored by Brilliant.org. Brilliant is where you learn by doing, with thousands of interactive lessons in math, data analysis, programming, and AI. And best of all, they don't leave you with much of an excuse. They have a great mobile app that allows you to learn on the go. They encourage daily logins to get involved and learn every day. And that's the beauty of Brilliant. It's why I've been using them for years, because it doesn't demand too much of your time if you're a busy person. You just sign in, couple of minutes, get your learn on, and then move on along. Brilliant is a learning platform designed to be uniquely effective with their first principles approach to help you build an understanding from the ground up, and that's by putting your hands on the problems itself. Everything's interactive, and they use real-world data so that you can get further into the learning process. And there is a full range of topics. I've been leaning a little bit into science as of lately, but it's really up to you and what direction you want to go for. So to try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, visit brilliant.org/MrMattyPlays or click the link in the description. You'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription. At first, it just seemed like Ubisoft was invulnerable to failure despite people being tired of their formula. Games were being purchased. I look at Assassin's Creed Valhalla as the biggest head scratcher for many. I enjoyed my time with it a lot, but it was definitely regarded as the most bloated Assassin's Creed game ever, and it still managed to sell tons and tons of copies. But since then, I feel like Ubisoft has really accelerated their own downfall with like the fall of 2020, where they had Watch Dogs, they had Immortals Phoenix Rising, and Assassin's Creed Valhalla all month to month, back to back to back. It was ridiculous. But also, the quality has fallen short with the self-proclaimed quadruple A game in Skull and Bones releasing earlier this year. Almost forgot about that one, but that wasn't good at all. Then you have Star Wars Outlaws missing the quality mark. And we're here now talking about Assassin's Creed Shadows, which was the subject of our last video, where we got into the delay and how it was much more messy than it seemed at face value. You know, you had the post go live from Ubisoft with the note delaying the game saying, oh yeah, look, hey everyone, this is just us trying to get the quality right. We'll see you on February 14th. But if you looked at the investors note that we highlighted in that last video, you would have seen there that Ubisoft mentioned Star Wars Outlaws underperforming, that they're not hitting the quality mark, that investors are investigating what is going on with Ubisoft. The people who are just invested in the company are trying to figure out why games are missing the quality mark there, and that Ubisoft will be doing Steam Day 1 releases. So we need more context on all of this, right? Because a lot of assumptions were thrown out there as to why this delay was kicked in. Because for those who didn't know, there was also a press event that was happening ahead of the release of Assassin's Creed Shadows, where people were going to get some hands-on time with the game. There was also going to be a Tokyo Game Show booth that then got pulled. So why so sudden? What happened here? Well, Tom Henderson of Insider Gaming has the scoop, so let's get into it. Where it starts off saying, Yves Guillemot pointed out in an internal memo that Star Wars Outlaws' initial sales proved softer than expected, with Guillemot pointing out that critics had rated the game 76 out of 100 on Metacritic. Although I wasn't given a figure on what Ubisoft anticipated Outlaws to sell within its first month, the game has just surpassed 1 million units sold at the time of writing. Its performance has seemingly caused alarm bells to ring at HQ, which not only led to the approval of the Assassin's Creed Shadows delay to Q1 2025, but to finally putting games back on Steam, a request that every Ubisoft team has been pushing for years. This goes to what we've heard a lot about with Ubisoft: management problems, where a lot of developers kind of know what fans want. Like, hey, we don't want template open worlds. They've pushed for that, but management has enforced that, as we knew. Same thing here. Steam. Seems like developers know, but management has been ignorant to those claims. And we'll get into why they've kind of shut down these requests from developers. It really comes to strict development timelines that Ubisoft seems to need to hit. But I did want to talk about the Outlaw sales being just north of 1 million, which is surprisingly low if you look at it at face value. But for me, it's like when you look at the declining value of Star Wars as a brand, you know, you look at what happened with the Acolyte, one season, one of the most hated pieces of Star Wars content ever, the most hated piece of Star Wars content ever. When you look at the fan reviews and everything like that, it just went up in flames, and they canceled after one season, right? And this isn't just a one-off. I feel like Star Wars and Disney as a whole has been having a really bad time with their service and just inconsistent quality. You get something like Deadpool and Wolverine, but it's easy to forget when you have so much mess surrounding it. But particularly with Star Wars, it's been really inconsistent. I've always defined it, as I've said in the past, as a bit of a roller coaster with quality, but it's never been this bad in my opinion. It's always been far, far better. And yeah, I think that's also reflected here in Star Wars Outlaws, where the quality of the game wasn't that high. It was a lot of what you expect from Star Wars nowadays. It's just not strong quality. It was buggy. It was messy. And it seems like they're aiming for a relaunch in November on Steam. So we'll see how that goes. But to the point here of this video, we're talking about Assassin's Creed Shadows. The article continues on. Why was Shadows delayed? It's a complicated question without a single answer, but it boils down to a strict development timeline, polishing and addressing the Japanese community's cultural and historical accuracy concerns. But first, let me address some of the wild rumors about Yasuke. He's not going to be removed. However, sources have said that the team has been actively addressing many of the historical and cultural concerns, which started before the game's reveal, following external playtests, and were accelerated further following the game's initial reveal and mass feedback. This including changing some of Yasuke's story and how he's portrayed in the game, fixing architectural details, and ensuring that the game is historically grounded while fitting into the Assassin's Creed universe. Fundamentally, though, these are issues that should have been caught internally before the game's reveal, especially given Ubisoft's strict asset approval process. As for how these issues fell through the cracks, I'm told that historical experts were brought onto the project much later than usual for a project of this magnitude, and that miscommunication between teams and cutting corners when it came to the approval process of assets to meet deadlines were also at play. It's so interesting to watch the development of Assassin's Creed Shadows, because when it was first revealed and there were historical accuracy concerns, a lot of people brushed this under the rug and went, well, Assassin's Creed is more of like a history, action, adventure series, and I've even defined it as such myself, and it's not really about the accuracy of the history there. But I always kind of thought to myself it was a little strange to use that argument, because then I think of things like in Assassin's Creed Origins, where they had this presentation mode that allowed you to explore the world and learn about the actual history of these settings in games. And no doubt that while it's like alternate history where you would have like Connor interacting with Benjamin Franklin in Assassin's Creed 3, it did inform you about these major historical figures and locations during a particular time period that required research. And what I found very interesting here, I will say, I think the excuse is a little lame of like, well, we didn't have the history experts there. I get how that'll lead to missteps like we talked about in our last Assassin's Creed video, where you kind of overlook the broken Torii Gate completely and you just post something for sale that is completely insensitive to Japanese culture. But in the terms of like making art in game, you typically work with reference. That's how you get your best work. And when you're working with reference, you're likely doing research where certain things should just be caught naturally speaking by researching what you're going to be making in game. If there is a next time for an Assassin's Creed game, I hope they don't make this mistake again, though. The historical experts should have been there from day one. Who knows what this game would have ended up being with that in mind. I am very, very surprised to see that Ubisoft has listened so closely to the criticism that they are actually going to change parts of Yasuke's story and how he is portrayed. And I'm infinitely curious if they're going to market that at all, because a lot of people tearing down, if you will, Assassin's Creed Shadows have pointed to him and his character and the inaccuracies attached to him that Ubisoft could be making adjustments on, but will they? And if they are, will this lead to people going, all right, hold on, this is better. We like where it's heading. I'm curious how far Ubisoft goes with this and if they even bring any attention to it at all, because for a lot of what we read with reasons behind Assassin's Creed's delay was due to toxic positivity crowding the development environment of Ubisoft, where this was a team that kind of yes-manned each other all the way to the top. And any criticism that they got would typically be regarded as a just toxic part of the fandom. And a lot of the criticism about sensitive subject matter was considered just toxic people who wanted nothing more than to fan the flames of controversy. But you're seeing here, they're listening and they're responding. So how loud will they be about that part is what I'm very curious to see. To be blunt, Ubisoft tries to appear culturally sensitive. This game shows, among many other things, that they are not that. Their reaction to this has been toxic positivity, labeling those who are rightly criticizing the game, saying, oh, well, you know what? Look, they're just a toxic subset of gamers. thinking that the reaction is extreme. Why do they think the reaction is extreme? It's because they refuse to realize that they are one of the many companies at the center of the problem of putting forward content in games, pretending to be culturally sensitive to all different demographics across the globe, when the reality is they are not. And as I said in our last video, people see through that. So it's very easy to cast aside that criticism and go, oh, they're being extreme, they're grifting, etc., etc. Grifters exist on both sides. There are people who are hype grifters who just get all that positivity going and just cash in on the hype. But the reality is you don't hear much about that, because guess who benefits from that? It's the companies. It's only about the people who push back against them. That's when it's negative. And I think Ubisoft clearly needs to do a better job of listening to criticism. That much we've learned from this entire launch cycle with Assassin's Creed Shadows. Now, continuing on, there's much more here. They say, as for the game's polish and issues with bugs, it's pretty self-explanatory. The game is currently not at the stage it needs to be for release, and I'm told that there have been some tweaks to the gameplay mechanics and elements that are going to take time to incorporate. While some of these issues were highlighted in recent playtests and mock reviews, these are end-of-development issues that will take a little bit longer. So it doesn't seem like there is a major alarm bell ringing. That's what I first thought when I saw that the press previews were canceled. I was like, oh, they found a bug, like a really bad bug that just made them hit the brakes. But it seems like this has been a cascading series of events, right? You have Star Wars Outlaws not doing that well. You have the realization that you do need to listen to criticism that's being laid at the feet of your company and do something about it, because again, you go to that share price, like it speaks for itself. Like someone's going to come in and buy out the company, and they could even pay a premium on those shares and still get Ubisoft and all of its IP for a song if they wanted to. You look at what Xbox paid for Activision Blizzard. They paid a premium on those shares. They overpaid for those shares. So yeah, someone could absolutely nab up Ubisoft for a pretty cheap price. No doubt the sharks are already swimming. I wouldn't be surprised if Xbox is in contact, Tencent's in contact, and I think that's the end result. I do think pass or fail with Assassin's Creed Shadows, I think this company gets sold off, and I don't think it's going to go to a great place. I think it's going to end up in a place like Tencent that would just be, I don't know how else to word this other than a very Ubisoft way to go out. Like, hey, all these IP you care about, they're over here with Tencent now. So continuing on here as this article wraps up, they say, of course, there are not new issues for the team. 7 developers working hard on the project said that they have been pushing for a delay for some time, and their situation had even been heard at other studios in the company. Ultimately, though, the delay comes down to a strict development timeline and the need to address issues caused by the set timeline. As for why Ubisoft HQ continues to ignore the developers on almost every level, Ubisoft's executive committee and board of directors will decide in their review, although 80% of 40 Ubisoft developers think this ends in no change or layoffs. But that's another story on the internal issues for another time. For now, though, Ubisoft Quebec will release Assassin's Creed Shadows on February 14th, 2025, and while the game isn't matching Valhalla in pre-order numbers, which launched on past generation consoles to a wider market, the numbers are solid and are likely to rise further given its Steam release announcement. So maybe that is why Ubisoft was okay delaying this as well, is that the pre-order numbers weren't looking too bad, where they anticipate that if they attend to the quality more, they address the historical inaccuracies, maybe that gives rise to further sales for Assassin's Creed Shadows. We'll see if they can crawl out of this at all. But to me, the biggest concern is the lack of listening to developers, because I think a lot of developers at Ubisoft get lashed by the public for decisions made way above their heads. That seems to be the consistent story for years and years and years about how mismanaged this entire company is, and that very little things that make it to the top actually get considered, or even things like delays. Like, it makes you wonder how frustrating it might be to work at Ubisoft, where you're just kind of helpless to their system of strict development timelines, and that the timeline itself that's being set, Ubisoft cannot work within, and that they need more time to make their games, but they're expected to release them at a pretty shockingly quick clip. You see how quickly they were putting out Assassin's Creed games every year. And then when they started to take a break on that, Far Cry was like coming out every year, whether it was like a spin-off title or a mainline title. It was just so often they had something coming out, where that's also why they never got to iterate on things and make things better. They just made the same thing continuously. And it was really frustrating as a fan. Like, I always look back, as I brought up in the past, my Assassin's Creed Syndicate review, where that is a pretty decent game in my opinion nowadays. But when I played it at the time, I gave it a awful review because I was so burnt out on Assassin's Creed, and it felt like nothing had inched forward. And it's funny because in hindsight, even as someone who enjoyed games like Assassin's Creed Odyssey, I do think Syndicate has aged remarkably well. And some other older Ubisoft Assassin's Creed games have aged really well there. So again, you just can't help but wonder what this company could have been if they listened to their developers more. They had more time to work on their games, bring new ideas to the fold. You know, I was having a conversation on Last Stand on Constellation about Ubisoft, and we were talking about Assassin's Creed Unity. I said, you know what's the biggest crime is that we haven't had like a true stealth-focused Assassin's Creed game since Unity, where you had multiple ways to take down your targets, kind of like in a Hitman style. That's just not been done before. Like Ubisoft is also, for all I'm trying to give the developers the benefit of the doubt, really bad at what type of criticism they listen to, clearly, as we're learning here and now. By that, I mean, for example, Unity was a problem on a technical level, but when it came to parkour and the ideas of how you assassinate your targets and the crowds and the faithfulness to the environments and like the side objectives, even like murder mysteries, like that was all great. Why did that not carry over whatsoever? It did a little bit into Syndicate, but then they hit the reset button, and many people did enjoy Origins. I was not a big fan of it, but yeah, that's where, for me, it just became a really weird situation for this company where I used to really enjoy their games, and then I think like 2014 hit, and I just was not as big of a fan because I was just so tired of the same thing constantly. They refused to evolve, and here we are now. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, that's the latest on Ubisoft. Really, really interesting situation developing here, and we'll be tracking it now because I'm in, and once I'm in, that's where you get all the coverage, right? So, ladies and gentlemen, let me know your thoughts on what's going on with Ubisoft down below. Fire away. Other than that, I will catch you all in the next video. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.